forced to marry a paralyzed man, until her kiss made him stand for love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic love stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. The city outside looked gray and tired, but inside the hospital's private lounge, everything was still too still. Lila Carter sat in a pressed navy dress that was clearly borrowed, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse over and over. The man in front of her, tall and dressed in black, spoke with the calm of someone used to giving orders. "Miss Lila Monroe," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "My client is offering you marriage. It is unconventional, but entirely legal. 6 months, no intimacy, no romantic obligations, only your signature." Lila blinked, thinking she had misheard. "Marriage?" The man nodded once. "Yes, to Mr. Grant Hale." Her throat tightened. Grant Hale, the young millionaire who had been paralyzed from the waist down after the car crash last winter. His name still appeared in business magazines, though mostly as headlines of tragedy. And now, he wanted a wife? The lawyer's tone remained even. "In return, your father's medical debts will be cleared immediately, and he will receive the heart surgery he needs. You will be compensated fairly after the 6-month term." Lila stared at the folder. It looked ordinary, but every word inside had the weight of her father's heartbeat. She laughed nervously, a sharp sound that cracked the silence. "You are serious." "I am." Her pulse hammered. Somewhere a clock ticked too loudly. "Why me?" The lawyer's expression did not change. "Because Mr. Hale asked for someone without ties to his world. Someone ordinary. Someone who will not fall in love with him." That line hit like a strange insult. But there was something even stranger behind it. Why would a man who could have anything choose to marry a woman who had nothing? Lila took the folder in trembling hands. The contract was typed in perfect legal phrasing, signed already at the bottom in neat ink. Grant Hale. Her eyes stopped at one clause. "This agreement remains valid even if physical recovery occurs." Her breath caught. Physical recovery? What was that supposed to mean? The lawyer stood, smoothing his coat. "He will see you tomorrow if you accept. Suite 904, Hale Private Wing." When he left, Lila remained frozen, listening to the rain beat against the window. The words echoed inside her mind: marriage. 6 months, no love. The next evening, she walked into Suite 904. It felt like walking into another world. The room was lined with mahogany panels, soft jazz playing from somewhere unseen, and there he was, Grant Hale, sitting in a wheelchair near the window, sunlight cutting across the sharp lines of his face. His voice was quieter than she expected. "You came." She swallowed. "I had to see for myself." "Then you know what I am offering." "I do, but I do not understand why." Quote. Grant's eyes met hers, unreadable, calm, yet strangely sad. "Because sometimes, the only way to stop people from pitying you is to give them something to talk about." She stared at him, speechless. There was pain in his sarcasm, a bitterness that almost dared her to judge him. He extended a pen toward her. "Sign it, Miss Monroe. Be my wife for appearance, for convenience, for 6 months. Nothing more." The sound of rain outside grew louder, drowning her thoughts. Her father's face flashed in her mind, pale and weak under the hospital lights. Her hand hovered over the paper. "If you were her, would you sign it?" The next morning, the city woke under a pale blue sky. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air heavy and clean. Lila stood outside the Hale estate, her suitcase small enough to look like she could leave at any second. The iron gates opened slowly, revealing a world she had never imagined belonging to tall hedges, polished stone, and the quiet kind of wealth that made her nervous to breathe too loudly. Inside, a housekeeper, named Mrs. Whitmore, greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." Lila froze at the title. It sounded wrong, too big for her. "Please, just Lila." Mrs. Whitmore nodded without argument. "Mr. Hale is in the West Wing. Breakfast is served in the atrium. You will have your own room and a schedule for his care." Lila followed her through the endless hallways. The house smelled of cedar and silence. When they reached the atrium, Grant was already there, seated near the window in his wheelchair. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The morning sun traced the edges of his jaw, and for a brief moment, Lila forgot to breathe. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," he said without looking up from his coffee. "Please," she said softly. "You do not have to call me that." He set the cup down. "And yet, that is what you are now, at least on paper." Lila took a seat across from him. The table felt like a mile wide. She looked down at the untouched breakfast eggs, toast, fruit arranged perfectly. Everything perfect, except the silence between them. Finally she said, "Do you regret it already?" Grant looked at her then, eyes calm, almost unreadable. "Regret implies I expected something different." Gums end quote. There was no anger in his tone, only truth. That somehow hurt more. The rest of the day passed in quiet motions. Lila explored the library, the garden, the wide staircase she was too afraid to climb. She watched Grant from a distance as he worked in his study, voice steady on phone calls, his wheelchair gliding across the hardwood floor like an extension of his will. At lunch, Mrs. Whitmore brought a tray for both of them. Lila tried to make small talk. "Do you always eat in here?" Grant's lips curved slightly. "Do you always ask questions no one answers?" Her face flushed. "I am sorry. I guess I talk when I am nervous." "That makes two of us," he said quietly, surprising her. For the first time, his eyes softened not pity, not mockery, just a flicker of humanity. That night, Lila stood on the balcony outside her room. The garden below shimmered with tiny lights, reflecting off the fountain in the center. Somewhere in the house, piano notes drifted faintly through the halls. She followed the sound until she reached the study again. Grant sat by the piano, his fingers resting over the keys. He was not playing, just remembering. "Do you play?" she asked. He did not look up. "I used to. Now the body does not listen." "Maybe it just forgot the song," she said softly. His lips moved, almost smiling. "You think music forgives forgetfulness?" "I think everything does, if you ask gently enough." Quote. Something changed in the air between them, fragile, unsure, but alive. He exhaled slowly. "Do you ever wonder what people would say, seeing us like this? A man who cannot walk? A woman who married him for debt? Sounds like a joke, does it not?" Lila shook her head. "No. It sounds like two people doing the best they can." Grant looked at her for a long time, and in that silence, she saw something she had not seen before: a man not broken, just fighting to stay human. As she turned to leave, he said quietly, "You can call me Grant if you want." She smiled faintly. "Then you should call me Lila." When she returned to her room, she could still hear the piano key he had pressed once, just one note, hesitant and low, echoing through the empty hall. Maybe this was not love. Not yet. But it was something that could almost feel like it. "Do you think that kind of connection can ever become love? Or is it just comfort?" The following morning began with sunlight spilling through the wide glass windows of the Hale estate. The house was quiet except for the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Lila stood by the breakfast table, staring at a folder Mrs. Whitmore had just handed her. "This is from Mr. Hale," the housekeeper said with her usual calm tone. "He asked that you read it carefully." Criped. Lila opened the folder and found 5 pages, neatly typed and signed at the bottom. The title read, "Marriage Terms and Household Guidelines." Her eyes scanned the list slowly. "Respect privacy. No entry into the West study without permission. No public affection. Maintain discretion at all times. Attend scheduled events as Mrs. Hale when requested. No emotional expectations. This is not a romantic union. The contract remains confidential under Penalty Clause 8. Lila felt her chest tighten as she reached the end. It was colder than she expected, more mechanical than human. She looked up to find Grant already at the far end of the dining room, observing her reaction. "Do you always begin your mornings with legal documents?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. Grant's voice was steady, almost gentle. "It keeps things clear. Expectations destroy arrangements like ours." She placed the folder down. "It sounds more like a business merger than a marriage." "In my world," he replied, "there is little difference." For a moment, the silence stretched between them, long enough for Lila to hear her own heartbeat. "Do you ever laugh, Grant?" she asked. "Or is that also written in the rules?" The corner of his mouth curved just slightly. "Not often, but you may try to change that." That small exchange stayed with her all day. The more time she spent in the house, the more she realized how lifeless it had been before she arrived. The maids moved quietly, the walls echoed, and even the flowers in the hallway seemed like they were holding their breath. In the afternoon, Lila entered the west garden, where Grant was watching the gardeners from his chair. The air smelled faintly of lavender and earth. She noticed a book resting on his lap, A Brief History of Music Therapy. Quote, "Are you planning to heal yourself with Bach and Beethoven?" she teased gently. Grant glanced up, one brow raised. "If I were, would that sound foolish to you?" "No," she said softly. "It would sound hopeful." He held her gaze longer than usual. "Hope is expensive, Mrs. Hale. I stopped buying it a long time ago." Lila hesitated, then stepped closer. "Maybe it just went out of stock temporarily." Something in his expression flickered a quiet amusement, maybe even warmth. That evening, Mrs. Whitmore arranged dinner on the terrace. The sky glowed orange, and the faint sound of crickets filled the air. Lila tried to eat, but the rules she had read that morning lingered like invisible chains. She finally said, "Grant, if I am to live by your rules, do I get to write any of my own?" He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What kind of rules?" She thought for a moment. "Rule 1. You have to tell me if something hurts. Rule 2. I get to make the coffee sometimes. And Rule 3. She looked at him, half smiling. "You have to laugh at least once a week." Grant tilted his head, clearly surprised. "You are making this sound dangerously close to a real marriage." "Maybe real marriages just need better rules," she replied. For the first time, he laughed soft, genuine, unguarded. The sound startled even him. "Consider Rule 3 accepted," he said. Lila smiled, and in that instant, something unspoken began to shift between them. The boundaries he built started to look less like walls and more like doors waiting to open. She looked at him across the candlelight, wondering quietly, if hearts follow rules, can they ever truly heal? If you were in their place, would you follow such rules? Or would you dare to break them? The following week, the Hale estate buzzed with quiet preparation. Mrs. Whitmore oversaw the staff polishing silver and arranging flowers for an upcoming charity gala hosted by the Hale Foundation. It would be Lila's first public appearance as Mrs. Hale, a name she still hesitated to answer to. In her room, a dress had been laid out for her, a long silver gown with a modest neckline and delicate beading that shimmered under the light. She touched the fabric carefully, afraid it might disappear under her fingers. Grant appeared at the doorframe, his wheelchair silent on the carpet. He studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "It suits you," he said simply. Lila turned, startled. "I am not sure I know how to walk in something that expensive." He gave a faint smile. "Then do not walk. Float." People like confidence more than perfection. Her heart skipped once at the softness in his tone. It was the first time he had spoken to her like she was more than an arrangement. Later that evening, the black car rolled through downtown toward the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel. Flashing lights, voices, and the sharp click of cameras greeted them as soon as they arrived. For a man who had once commanded every room he entered, Grant now drew attention for different reasons. The whispers followed like shadows. "That is Grant Hale. Poor man, such a shame about the accident." "And who is she? His nurse?" Lila felt the weight of every stare. Grant noticed, his voice low. "Remember what I said, float." She nodded and placed her hand lightly on his shoulder as they entered the ballroom. Inside, chandeliers blazed overhead, and 100 faces turned toward them. The master of ceremonies welcomed Mr. and Mrs. Hale to polite applause. Grant's old business partner, Edward Langford, approached with a practiced smile. "Grant, it is good to see you out. And Mrs. Hale, you look radiant." Lila returned the smile politely. "Thank you, Mr. Langford. Grant has told me much about your work." The man chuckled. "I doubt he told you the good parts." Grant's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Lila felt the tension rise. The conversation around them quieted slightly, and she could sense the eyes waiting for a reaction. She took a calm breath and said, "Then tonight is the perfect time for you to tell them yourself, Mr. Langford. The foundation deserves credit for what it has built." Her tone was smooth, her smile effortless. For a moment, the older man blinked, caught off guard by her poise. Grant's hand shifted on his chair, subtle, approving. Throughout the night, Lila stayed near him, introducing herself, shaking hands, answering polite questions. She never once stumbled. She moved as if she belonged. When the music began, couples filled the dance floor. Grant watched them quietly. "You should join them," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "And leave you alone here?" He smiled faintly. That is what everyone expects you to do. Then they can keep expecting, she said. He turned toward her fully, his expression unreadable. You do realize you just passed your first test. Lila tilted her head. Was that what this was? A test? He nodded once. To see if you could stand beside me when the world whispered. She met his gaze steadily. I do not care what the world whispers. I care about the man who listens. For a long moment they said nothing. The lights reflected in his eyes, softening them, revealing a quiet gratitude he did not speak. As they left the gala later that night, rain began to fall again, gentle and familiar. Lila held the umbrella over both of them as they made their way to the car. Grant looked up at her and said, almost to himself, "You did more for me tonight than any doctor ever could." She glanced down at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes. "You made me forget that I was broken." Crew. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was full, alive, and trembling with something neither of them dared to name. Maybe healing did not begin in hospitals. Maybe it began in moments like this, small, quiet acts of grace. The morning after the gala, the air in the Hale estate felt different. It was quieter, softer, as if the walls themselves had heard what happened the night before. For the first time in months, Grant woke before sunrise. He sat by the window, the wheelchair locked in place, watching the faint pink glow stretch across the sky. He could still hear the echoes of Lila's voice from last night, steady, calm, unafraid. She had faced a ballroom full of judgment and never once flinched. Something inside him had shifted then, something he had spent months pretending did not exist. Downstairs, Lila entered the kitchen in a loose sweater, her hair still damp from the shower. She was humming softly as she poured 2 cups of coffee. When she looked up, she found Grant already there, waiting. "I did not know you were an early riser," she said, surprised. "I was not," he replied. "But you make the mornings quieter somehow." Lila blinked, unsure what to say. His tone was softer than usual, not sharp or measured, just real. She set a cup beside him. "Then I should start charging for peace and quiet." Quote. For a moment he almost laughed, then looked down at the steam rising from the cup. "You looked strong last night." "I was terrified," she admitted. "That is what made it impressive," he said. "Strength is not the absence of fear. It is doing something anyway." The silence between them was comfortable now. The kind of silence that did not ask for words to fill it. Later that day, Grant's physical therapist arrived for the usual session. Lila watched from the doorway as he struggled to move from the chair to the parallel bars. His arms trembled with effort, his jaw clenched. Sweat gathered at his temples. "Do not," he said through his teeth. "Offer to help." "I was not going to," she replied, even though she wanted to. He lifted one leg slowly, then the other. It was not much, just a shift of balance. But it was the first time she had seen him stand even halfway. Her heart tightened. He caught her watching and said, "You look like you are witnessing a miracle." "Maybe I am," she whispered. After the therapist left, Lila brought a small speaker into his study. "You read about music therapy, remember? Let us try something less formal." Grant raised a brow. "You plan to heal me with pop songs?" She smiled. Not pop, something older. The first notes of an old jazz record filled the room, low and smooth. Grant stared at the window, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, his fingers began to tap against the armrest, keeping rhythm. "You see?" she said quietly. "The body remembers more than it admits." He looked at her for a long moment. "And what about you, Lila? What do you remember?" She hesitated, caught off guard. "I remember being afraid of everything, but lately, I am not sure what I am afraid of anymore." Grant's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe that is how healing begins, when fear loses its name." Quote. That night, she found him again in the piano room. He was pressing single keys, one after another, slow but certain. The sound was uneven, but alive. She stood behind him, saying nothing, letting the music fill the space. When he finally stopped, he looked up at her. "You know what is strange," he said. "For months, I hated this piano. I thought it was mocking me. Now it feels like it has been waiting for someone else to play it." She met his gaze, her voice soft. "Maybe it was." Quote. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, persistent, familiar. Grant lifted his head toward the sound. "I used to hate the rain too," he said, "but tonight it feels like breathing." Lila smiled faintly. "That is because for the first time you are not drowning in it." He nodded slowly, his voice quiet but certain. "No, this time I am learning to stand in it. And for the first time since the accident, Grant Hale did not feel like a man confined to his past. He felt like someone finally learning how to live again. The following days moved in a rhythm neither of them had expected. Grant's recovery sessions grew longer. He spoke more. He laughed more. And each morning, Lila found herself lingering at the breakfast table longer than necessary, pretending to read the paper when she was really just watching him. One afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore announced she would be leaving for the weekend to visit family. The house, usually filled with her quiet footsteps, suddenly felt too big for just two people. As the evening settled, the sky turned violet, and Lila stood in the garden trimming flowers for the dining table. She did not hear Grant approach until his wheelchair stopped behind her. "You are supposed to let the staff do that," he said. She turned with a smile. "They are gone, remember? Tonight, it is just you and me." His brows lifted slightly. "That sounds dangerously unsupervised." "Gug. Then maybe we should risk it," she replied, handing him a rose. He took it carefully, turning the stem between his fingers. "I forgot how it feels to hold something that alive," he said quietly. Lila looked at him, her voice low. "You are not the only one learning to feel again." Dinner that night was simple grilled salmon, a bottle of red wine they both pretended to know how to pronounce, and the faint sound of rain tapping against the glass. They talked about everything and nothing: books, music, the way the city lights looked from the west balcony. At one point, Grant said, "You do realize you have become the loudest part of this house." She tilted her head, pretending offense. "Is that your polite way of saying I talk too much?" "No," he said. "It is my way of saying the silence is not so heavy anymore." They sat there, smiling without realizing it. Something unspoken hung between them, warm, confusing, but undeniable. Later, when the storm grew stronger, the lights flickered once and went out. The room fell into darkness. Lila gasped softly. "Do you have candles?" "In the study," he said. "Top drawer, right side." She found them easily and lit a few. The flames painted soft light across the walls, across his face. It made him look younger, almost untouched by pain. When she returned to the table, Grant was staring at the flicker of the candle between them. "It is strange," he said, "how a little light can make a whole room feel alive again." Lila nodded slowly. Maybe it just needed someone to light it. Their eyes met, and for the first time neither looked away. "Lila," he said quietly, "I know what this was supposed to be. An arrangement, a transaction. But lately," he paused, searching for words. "Lately it feels like something I do not understand anymore." She swallowed hard. "Maybe understanding ruins it. Maybe it is supposed to be messy." Grant exhaled, a sound between a laugh and a sigh. "That is not how my world works." "Then maybe it should," she said softly. For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the small hiss of candlelight. Lila stood, collecting the dishes, but her hands were trembling slightly. Grant reached out and touched her wrist, gentle, hesitant. It was the first time he had ever reached for her. The touch froze her in place. His fingers were warm, his eyes searching hers. "You do not have to stay because of a contract," he said. She shook her head. "I know." "Then why are you still here?" Lila looked down at his hand still resting on hers. "Because for the first time, I do not feel like I am taking care of you. I feel like I am finally being seen." Grant let go slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "You have been seen since the day you walked in." The moment stretched thin, fragile, and full of meaning. The candlelight flickered once more, reflecting in their eyes. Outside, thunder rolled across the distance, soft but certain. Do you think what they feel now is love? Or is it just comfort pretending to be love? The next morning, the sun rose bright and unbothered, as if it did not know what had happened the night before. The house glowed with light again, but something between Lila and Grant had shifted. The air was thicker, charged with words neither had the courage to speak. Grant had fallen asleep in his study after the storm. When he woke, Lila was gone from the room, but a note lay beside his coffee mug. It said only, "Breakfast is waiting. L." He smiled faintly, touched the paper, and then folded it carefully into his pocket. By mid-morning, the Hale estate was no longer quiet. A silver car pulled into the driveway, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out. Grant's half-brother, Nathan Hale, carried the kind of confidence that could slice through air. He did not wait for an invitation before entering. "Grant," he said smoothly, "I see you are alive and entertaining company." Grant wheeled forward slowly. "Nathan, to what do I owe the visit?" "I heard about your little arrangement," Nathan replied. his eyes narrowing toward the dining room where Lila appeared with a tray. "The new Mrs. Hale, is it?" Lila froze in the doorway, unsure whether to smile or retreat. Nathan's tone sharpened. "Tell me, brother, how much did this charity case cost you? Or was she cheaper than your last investment?" The words hit like a blade. Lila's face drained of color. Grant's voice dropped, quiet but firm. "Leave her out of this." Nathan laughed. "You think hiding behind a contract makes it love? Or are you pretending again, like you always do?" Lila set the tray down, her hands trembling. "You should go," she said, keeping her voice calm. Nathan turned to her, eyes cruel. "Oh, do you think you belong here? You do know he paid off your father's hospital bills, right? That he bought your loyalty, just like he buys everything else?" Grant's chair rolled forward sharply. "Enough." But the damage was done. The words had found their mark. Lila looked at Grant, her breath catching. "Is that true?" He hesitated, and in that heartbeat of silence, she had her answer. Her voice cracked. "You paid my father's debts before I even agreed to marry you." "Gah." "Yes," he said finally. "I wanted to help." "No," she whispered. "You wanted control." "Lila." She shook her head, stepping back. "You said this marriage was about honesty, about clarity. But you never told me that my choice was never real." Nathan smirked. "You see, brother, she was never in it for love." Grant turned to him, anger breaking through the calm he had held for months. "Get out of my house." Nathan shrugged, stepping toward the door. "Careful, Grant. When you build your world on sympathy, it tends to collapse." When he was gone, the silence left behind was unbearable. Lila stood near the window, her back to Grant. "I thought you saw me," she said. "But you only saw someone you could save." Grant's voice was low, filled with regret. "You were never a project to me." "Then what was I?" she asked, her eyes shining. "A distraction? A reason to feel less broken?" He tried to move toward her, but the words stopped him. "I do not need you to fix me," she said, her voice trembling. "And I cannot be what you use to fix yourself." She turned and left before he could answer, the echo of her footsteps lingering like rain against the marble floor. That night the house returned to its silence. The piano sat untouched. The coffee went cold. And for the first time since the contract began, Grant Hale felt truly paralyzed not by his body, but by the weight of what he had lost. Sometimes the truth does not free you. It just reminds you how heavy love can be when it was built on unspoken lies. Days turned into weeks after Lila left the Hale estate. The house that once echoed with quiet warmth fell back into the kind of silence Grant had known before she arrived. The air felt colder now, heavier. Every morning, Mrs. Whitmore still brought him his coffee, but it no longer tasted the same. He tried to play the piano again, yet every note sounded hollow. He told himself she would come back, that perhaps after some time she would understand. But as the days stretched, the empty space beside him felt more like punishment than patience. In a small apartment across the river, Lila was rebuilding her life. She had returned to her work at the rehabilitation clinic, spending long hours with patients who reminded her of the man she had left behind. She told herself that she did not miss him, that walking away had been the right choice. But every time she heard the rain tapping against the window, his voice came back to her soft, careful, and full of everything he never said. One afternoon, she found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her heart raced as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The picture showed her standing beside Grant at the charity gala, smiling under the bright chandelier lights. On the paper were 6 words written in blue ink. "You made me stand again. G." Her hands trembled. She read the line over and over until the words blurred. That evening, she visited her father at the nursing facility. He was recovering, stronger than before. When she told him about Grant, he listened quietly and then said, "Sometimes forgiveness is not about who was wrong. It is about who has the courage to start over." Quote, the next morning, Grant's physical therapist arrived for their usual session, only to find him already practicing. Grant was at the parallel bars, sweat pouring down his face, jaw tight with determination. "I do not need rest," he said through clenched teeth. "I need to move." Each attempt was harder than the last. His arms shook violently, his breath ragged. Yet step by step he pushed forward. The therapist watched in stunned silence as Grant lifted his body an inch higher, then another. For the first time, both of his feet touched the floor. "Enough," the therapist said. "You will hurt yourself." Grant looked up, eyes burning with something fierce. "Pain is not the worst thing. Regret is. When the therapist left, Grant remained by the bars, trembling. He stared at his reflection in the glass wall. The man who looked back was different, not healed, but awake. That evening, he wrote another letter, though he did not send it. It said, "Lila, you once told me that healing begins when fear loses its name. You were right. I am afraid, but I am standing anyway. If love is anything, it must be that, standing even when you are terrified." He folded the paper and placed it inside the piano bench, beside the rose she had given him that night in the garden. Meanwhile, Lila stood on a crowded bus, heading home after her shift. A news alert flashed on the screen above the aisle. Businessman Grant Hale makes first public appearance since accident. The image showed him standing, supported slightly by a cane but smiling, truly smiling. She covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. People around her clapped at the headline, unaware that she was part of the story. When she returned home, she looked at the photograph on her wall, the one from the gala, and whispered, "You did it." Quote. The rain began to fall again outside, gentle and rhythmic. And for the first time since leaving him, Lila did not feel broken. She felt ready. Because sometimes, distance does not end a story. It teaches you how much it matters. 2 months passed before Lila finally gathered the courage to return to the Hale estate. The day she arrived, the sky was a soft gray, the kind of color that promised rain but never quite delivered it. The iron gates opened just as they had the first time, but everything inside felt different now. The flowers in the garden were brighter, the windows open to the sound of wind and birds. The house no longer looked like a monument to grief. It looked alive. Mrs. Whitmore met her at the door with a knowing smile. "He is in the music room," she said quietly. "He has been there most mornings." Lila nodded, her heart racing as she walked down the familiar hall. When she reached the doorway, she froze. Grant stood by the piano, no wheelchair, no therapist, only a slim cane beside him. His posture was careful but steady. The sight took her breath away. He looked up when he heard her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You came back." "I did," she said softly. "I saw the news. You were standing." He nodded once, his voice calm. "I have been trying to remember how to stay upright ever since." Quote. Lila stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "You did not need me to heal you after all." Grant shook his head. "You are wrong. I just had to learn what healing really meant. It was never about walking again. It was about forgiving myself." She felt tears rising, but she did not look away. "Grant, I never wanted to be your cure. I only wanted to be your choice." He reached for the edge of the piano to balance himself, then took a careful step forward. "And you are. You always were." "Godu?" Lila covered her mouth, trying to hold in a sob. She wanted to move to him, but he lifted a hand slightly, stopping her not in rejection, but in quiet triumph. "Let me," he said. His voice shook, but his eyes were sure. He took another step, then another. The space between them disappeared until he stood only inches away. His hand reached for hers, fingers trembling as they met. "I told myself I would stand again when I found a reason to. It turns out the reason was never pride or revenge or recovery. It was you." Lila's tears finally fell. "You are standing because you always could," she whispered. "You just needed to believe you were worth it." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it was your kindness that made me believe." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "What now, Grant? What happens after the contract ends?" He laughed softly, the sound warm and real. "It already ended. I tore it up the day you left." Quote. Her eyes widened. "Why?" "Because love is not a term you can renew. It is a decision you keep making." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him carefully. He leaned into her, not out of weakness but out of peace. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain through the open window. The same rain that had marked the beginning of their story now returned not as a storm, but as something cleansing. Grant whispered against her hair. "You once said music forgives forgetfulness. I think love does too." Lila looked up at him. "Then let us start from the first note again." He smiled, pressed his lips softly to her forehead and said, "Only if you promise not to stop the song halfway." She laughed through her tears. "Not this time." As they sat by the piano, Grant's hand rested on the keys. The melody that filled the room was uneven, gentle, and full of life. It was not perfect, but it was honest. Outside, the rain began to fall again, steady, calm, and full of grace. Because in the end, love did not heal him. She did. And sometimes, standing for love means learning how to walk forward together. Do you believe two people can truly fall in love after a contract ends? Share your thoughts in the comments below.